So this is Chapter 9, Part 2, and this is the last slide that we left off of at the end of Part 1. We went through picking out all the four main tissue types in the skin, which is an organ. So for the rest of the videos we're going to cover the organ systems. So we're going to start out with the skeletal muscular system. Like I said, we're going to combine some of them where we're not really getting too deep into one system. We're just seeing how they kind of work in unison and how they work for the organism as a whole. So the musculoskeletal system. So the first thing you want to know about this system are what are the two types of cells that actually cause it to grow. So everybody knows, from the time you're 5 years old, your bones are pretty hard. They're ossified. You're still growing. Your growth plates are still in check, but you have ossified bone. So how did that hard ossified bone get to be from the height that you were when you were 5 years old to the height you were when you're 15 years old or 20 years old? And so there's two types of cells that are necessary for this. Again, we're going to look at the root words of these words. So you see osteo, which means bone, so the first part of the word, and then you see clast, and then you see osteo and blast. I highlighted the B because B stands for build. So if you're going to tear down bone, which is as hard as rock, as an analogy, I guess, that's one I can think of, you're going to have to liquefy it chemically somehow. And then another cell is going to drink in that liquid, and when it's your bones, it's made of minerals. It's hydroxyapatite, but you don't have to know that word. And it's going to drink up those minerals and then lay them down in a longer fashion or a wider fashion. It's called bone remodeling. Bone remodeling. So even if you're done growing, if your growth plates are now solid, they can take an x-ray of your long bones to tell if you're done growing. That you still will remodel your bone. So for instance, if you lose the ability, let's just hypothetically, you can't walk for a year, your bones will actually atrophy because they don't have pressure on them because you'll be sitting a lot. Though if you get into weightlifting, like they found in a couple of studies that weightlifting is one of the best exercises older people can do, because not only does it tone the muscle, increase circulation, but it also keeps bone density, because both men and women suffer from osteoporosis. Now you're starting to understand that word a little bit. Osteo means bone, and porous means it's porous. So for some reason, the endocrine system, which we'll cover last in this chapter, gets a little bit out of whack. And for some reason, maybe you can think about this now. If someone has osteoporosis, which one of these two cells would be working more aggressively? It'd be the osteoclasts. They'd be breaking down the bone faster than the osteoblasts can build the bone, and therefore your bone would become less and less dense to the point where it could break just by walking. Sounds pretty crazy. So again, the osteoclasts will liquefy the bone matrix, and then the osteoblasts are right behind them, and I have a video link for this, drinking up those liquefied minerals and then laying them down either longer or wider. It's called bone remodeling. On the bottom, you'll see some bones that you have to know. Now, I didn't pick any bones that are over the top. Some of these you look at, you probably already recognize them. Maybe try to put your hand on them as we're going through the list. So the mandible. The mandible is your jawbone, the bottom jaw. The top bone is the maxillary. The bottom bone is the mandible. Your clavicle is your collarbone. Okay. Starts with a C. I don't know. You can make mnemonics for these as you go along if it helps. The humerus. Now you have a funny bone. They call it the funny bone. You hit your funny bone. It's not very funny, is it? It hurts. There's a nerve that's very exposed there. So the humerus is the upper arm bone. So think funny bone, it's the upper arm bone because the nerve really runs along the bottom of that humerus bone. The radius, if you stand as the skeleton standing, anatomical position with your thumbs turned out, the radius is on your thumb side. You have two bones in your lower arm, and you have two bones in your lower leg. That's so you can rotate your hands and rotate your feet. The radius is on the lateral side. So if you're holding your hands, palm face frontwards, thumbs out, the radius is on the thumb side and the ulna is on the other. Do you know the radius? Think about carpals. They're your wrist bones. You drive a car with your carpals, or carpal tunnel syndrome. All you got to know is carpals are in your hand, wrist. You don't have to know the metatarsals. You don't have to know the phalanges. Just know carpals and metacarpals are in your hands and wrists. And then we get down to the lower body, the femur, biggest bone in the body, it's your thigh bone. Tibia, your shin bone. That's when you hit on something and you scream. Fibula, that's the second bone. So here's something to think about. The outside of your ankle is formed by the fibula. The inside of your ankles are formed by the tibia. And they rotate. Those two bones articulate. And then obviously you're guessing if the carpals are in your wrist and your hands, the tarsals are in your toes or in your feet and your ankles. And the reason you have to know some of these bones is because we're going to talk about how the muscles move them. The growth plate we talked about right here, like, so this is a newborn. I don't know why it was x-rayed, found the picture. The reason this looks kind of red is because this is pretty much all cartilage. This is a newborn. It's never had to deal with gravity. It's never really, probably even hardly even crawled. I didn't write down the age of it. So most of all the bones in this child are cartilage still, and that's why the x-ray goes right through them. Growth plates are in your long bones. They're at the end of your femur here, top of your femur, and then top of the long bones and the bottom of the long bones. They call this proximal and distal. Proximal and distal to the core of the body. And the same in the upper arm humerus, proximal, distal, and the radius, proximal and distal. So once those growth plates are ossified, you're not going to grow longer, you're not going to grow taller, but they are made of cartilage. These are two videos that will help if you go and open the PowerPoint, especially the hormone-guided bone growth video. That's pretty interesting. So now for movement, consider how you're able to do a bicep curl. So think about, you can look at the skeleton, you know your biceps on your upper arm, so that's the humerus. So somehow it's going to get you to curl your hand to your shoulder. So a couple of things have to happen. The muscle has to be up near the top of the shoulder because that's where the strength is going to be. And in order for the hand to move to the shoulder, the muscle has to go across the joint. Hopefully this is making logical sense right now. So it has to go across the joint. In order for a muscle to move a bone, number one, it's going to contract and pull on it. It's going to have to pull on two bones because it's going to have to anchor on one. So it's going to anchor on the head of the humerus or the clavicle, and that's called the origin. And then it's going to insert down here on the radius and the ulna in order to pull it up to the shoulder. So origin and insertion. And so I got a GIF of this so you can kind of watch it. So you can see that the origin is up here. You got two heads. That's why it's called the bicep, because you have two. And you don't even have to know. You just have to know the general area of the origin. So the origin doesn't move. Now, of course it could move, but what we're saying is when the muscle contracts, the insertion down here on the radius is pulled towards the origin. The origin stays stable. If you ever saw someone cheat in a gym when they're working out, they throw the weight with their body. I get it, you know, it can help you get it going, but typically you want to stabilize the origin and then make the insertion pull up towards the origin. So the insertion always moves towards the origin, and we're going to do a couple of these as we go through the slides. Here is what I was talking about with osteoporotic bone and then normal bone. So remember, if it's osteoporotic, that means the osteoclasts are working harder than the blasts. And this is how you think about your muscular system pulling on the bones like a little puppeteer, because bones, muscles can only contract. So they can only pull on the bones. They can't push. The skeleton can push as a whole once the muscles are attached to them, as they use antagonists and Yeah, antagonists and prime movers. I had to think about that. So here is a very lean person, no skin, bodybuilder type hypertrophy person, so you can see the muscles clear. This is the front side of the body, the anterior view. So you might want to pause the video and try to guess some of these muscles. I am just going to ask you to know some of these from a gym perspective, so you can know them by their nicknames. Okay, we could probably run through these. So your chest muscles, pectoralis major, you can know them as the pecs. Biceps, here on the humerus, you can know them as the bis. The back of the arm is the triceps, you can know them as the tris. Up here you shrug your shoulders with your traps, trapezius, but you can know them as the traps. Your shoulders are your delts, because if you cut the shoulder muscle off the body, laid it out flat, it would look like a triangle. That's deltoid. The front of your legs are your quads, because there's 4 of them here. Quads. The back, we're going to do a posterior view later, so we'll cover that later. The gastrocnemius is probably the hardest one to learn. Gastroc. I try this every term and it doesn't seem to fly. Gastronomic delights means your stomach. It looks like a belly, and the calf looks like a belly. I'm reaching here, but that's why they named it that. So that's your gastrocnemius. You would never have to spell these, I promise. And this muscle here is because of shin, it causes shin splints. But the reason this muscle is helpful to learn is because it's named for the position and it's named for the bone it's on. So what was the shin bone again? The tibia. And the front side of the body is the anterior. So it's called, this muscle here is called the anterior tibialis. If you put your hand on the front of your shin and pull your toe up and put your toe down and pull your toe up, you'll feel that muscle. If that's overworked, it can pull the periosteum off the bone of the tibia, and that's what a shin splint is. So, I think the only one we didn't cover that I'm asking you to know is the abs. I'm not asking you to know the sternocleidomastoid. That's just another cool muscle that I'm going to go through. The rectus abdominis. So you can know them as the abs. So bis, abs, quads, gastrocnemius, traps, delts, pecs, and anterior tibialis. The sternocleidomastoid is named because it goes from the sternum to the clavicle, clido, to the mastoid process, which is that bone behind your ear. So that muscle forms that V in your neck and it goes down to your sternum. That's why a lot of muscles are named for their attachments. So here we go with the origin and attachment. If you look at this GIF carefully, you'll see, hopefully you can see what bone this is. This is the largest bone in the body here, because there's a hand. So this is the femur. And down here, the bigger, thicker bone that's moving is the tibia, and the little one is the fibula. So this is the hamstrings. It's hard to tell it's the back of the leg, but since the heel is coming up to the back, it's moving backwards because you can't bend your leg the other way. It has to be the back side. So these are the hamstrings. Now they got the major ones pulled away just so you can, I think it's the membranosus and the tendinosus here. But the bottoms, you don't have to know those. You just have to know the hamstrings, the quads, and the hamstrings. But if you look at the hamstrings, this is where they're inserted on the tibia and the fibula. That's how they move your lower leg up to your butt. That's why it's called the hamstring curl. They sometimes will just call it the leg curl if they get lazy, but that's how the hamstrings actually help you walk forward by pulling your leg backwards so that you can take another step. And these videos really do help watching that go through. Here's the posterior. So some of these you're probably already guessing. You have the traps that we already did. This is the back side. You got the tris. You got the delts up here. The lats. That's a swimmer's muscle. Get it? Latitude. Latitude means wide. Lats. It's called the latissimus dorsi, which means it's wide on the back. Dorsi, like dorsal fin. You got the glutes. You got a maximus and a medius, but you only have to know glutes. Here are your hamstrings. You can know them as hams. And gastrocnemius again. So you don't have to know the brachioradialis. Biceps femoris, I used to ask students to know the individual hamstrings, and I don't do that now. You just have to know them. Biceps femoris is one of the main hamstrings. So the biceps femoris, semitendinosus, semimembranosus are all the hamstrings. So you just have to know the back of the thigh as the hamstrings. Okay, so don't worry about that. So now we're going into the actin and myosin. So how does a muscle actually contract? So this picture up here in the top left is super microscopic. We're talking 1000 magnification, even though it's a computer manufactured image, but that's how big it would be if you could see it under a microscope. So the myosin are the blue bits, and the actin are the red bits. And what the myosin is going to do, if it has ATP, and the actin has calcium, so calcium, here we go again. Remember what calcium did for the nerve? Calcium sent the neurotransmitter into the synapse. So calcium is going to be released, land on the actin, change the shape of the actin. That way, myosin can grab a hold of it and ratchet these actin Z lines in. I'm going to show you a GIF on it here in a second. So just remember, one way to remember that calcium is needed for actin is AC and calcium is Ca. And down here is kind of, if you can think of tug of war, the myosin are the hands and the actin is the rope. And here is a GIF of it, so you can see those purple lines being pulled in. So it's kind of hard to tease out between the two of them, but just know the myosin pulls on the actin because calcium changed the shape of the actin, and ATP was there to power the myosin. So there's other parts of this sliding filament theory, but you don't have to know them. The actin here is attached, anchored to this purple line running up and down. And so when the myosin heads grab it, it pulls that vertical purple line in on each side. And there's millions of these in one muscle. And so your muscle kind of contracts like a worm moves. And then I ask you, so fill in the according bones for each muscle in order to walk forward. Why 2 bones for each? Because you have an origin and insertion. So the gluteus maximus is kind of tough. The gluteus maximus, you have to think how it pulls your muscle. So it's going to pull your femur. It's going to pull it back. So it's going to be the insertion is going to be on the side of the femur, and the origin is going to be on the back of the pelvis, more medial. I'm not going to actually ask you about the gluteus maximus because it's kind of tricky, but I will ask you about the biceps femoris, which is the hamstrings, remember? And the gastrocnemius is the muscle that allows you to go up on your toes. So think about that. If you're able to pull your heel up to the top, right? Because technically when you go up on your toes, your heel is moving up. The insertion has to be the heel bone, and the origin has to be up somewhere on the tibia. So here are a bunch of videos. So if you're stuck on this, watch some of these, and it'll really help you understanding how the origin insertion works for the muscles to allow the skeleton to actually move. Here is how the muscle looks. They call this a muscle scale, but it's taking you from microscopic. So in one of these fibers is actin and myosin, millions of them. It's almost like fiber optic, and believe it or not, the nerve looks similar. And then they go into a fascicle, you go bigger and bigger, and then they're wrapped by a muscle. There's epimyosin, paramyosin, endomyosin, all these different layers. You don't have to know those. Just that you understand that they're concentric circles within circles. It gives it strength. Bone is organized this way. Nerve is organized this way. Trees are organized this way, especially monocots. And your nervous system is organized this way. Interesting, right? So, and if we work from the bone out is what might help you a little bit better. So here's the bone. It's got concentric circles in it too, just like the muscle here. And then the periosteum is connective tissue, and then that forms the tendon, And then that connective tissue forms the fascia, which is the epimysin, which actually gives the muscle its shape, and then even continues more into the muscle itself, the epimysin, the endomysin that wrap around each of these little fascicles of muscle. So here are name the origin and insertion for the following. The biceps brachii means the one in the arm, not the one in the leg. We did that one. The hamstring we did where the insertion is on the tibia and the fibula. You could just say the tibia. And the origin would be up on the pelvis. You don't even have to know the 6 bones of the pelvis. Just say pelvis. Now the abs, you have to think now, the origin stays put and the insertion moves. The abs are going to seem backwards. What's not moving? The pelvis isn't moving. Your rectus abdominis, your abs, actually originate on your pelvis and insert on your sternum or your rib cage. We did the bicep, and then this one's kind of tricky, the delts. You have to kind of watch that GIF for a while. But if you try to fly like a bird, you can kind of get, that's the muscle for the delts. So the part that's not moving is up on the clavicle up here. Clavicle and the scapula. So that's the origin. And then the insertion is down on the humerus. Someone who's really defined, you can clearly see where the delt fits into the humerus and attaches to it, actually inserts to it, and then the bicep wraps around it on the front, and then the tricep wraps around it on the back. I know, this is pretty sad. This was sent to me by a student. You might want to pause it if you want to read through it. It's pretty lame. So now how about for a quick review of the nervous system, since I'm not asking you to know any of the nervous systems. You got a central nervous system, a peripheral nervous system, an enteric nervous system in your digestive system. I don't go into that. All I want you to know is a nerve impulse. So remember, try to think through this before I do it, so if you have to pause it. But you have the stimulus at the dendrite. It goes around the phospholipid bilayer by the cell body. It kicks open the sodium protein channel at the head of the axon. That starts the action potential, so it keeps kicking them open, kicking them open, kicking them open. Sodium moves in, all in and out, comes down here, kicks open the calcium channel. Calcium moves in, and then calcium will run into the synapse and release a neurotransmitter into the synapse. The only chemical that can be in a synapse is a neurotransmitter. You do not have to know examples of neurotransmitters, just only know that neurotransmitters go into the synapse, which is that gap between nerves, or between a nerve and a muscle, or a nerve and a gland, etc. So now for the cardiovascular respiratory systems, again combined. There won't be much on the respiratory. That's where oxygen is inhaled because of the diaphragm and breathed in because of the diaphragm, and then diffused and CO2 comes out. But the one thing about the cardiovascular system is it's the transport system. So you look at these other slides. So I just mentioned about CO2 and oxygen. You remember O2 was needed for cellular respiration. And so that's giving the reactant for cellular respiration to make ATP and taking away the CO2 to control blood pH. You come down here to the digestive system, there's a lot going on down there. But you're going to absorb the nutrients, for instance, glucose that's needed for cell respiration to make ATP, amino acids, all these other fatty acids to make hormones, amino acids to do protein synthesis, and glucose to make ATP. Then you have the kidneys over here. Remember, kidneys regulate what? PP, blood pH and blood pressure. And then it will excrete all the metabolic byproducts and to the bladder to be excreted. And all of these are made of cells, and then also to feed the cells throughout the body by circulating all these nutrients and carrying away all the metabolic waste. No system can stand alone. So I went through all of those. So the respiratory system. You probably know of these parts. You got the nose, or officially known as the nares. Then it goes back to the pharynx, which is the area in the back of your throat when you're coughing up stuff. The larynx is easy to remember because of laryngitis. That's where your vocal cords are. And then you have the trachea, which has that ciliated columnar tissue, if you remember. And then it goes down into the bronchioles, bronchial tree. And then it goes into the lung, where the alveoli increase the surface area and allow for diffusion. So there's no energy for the lungs exchanging gases because diffusion is passive transport. The muscle that breathes is the diaphragm. And you should breathe through your nose. These are good videos on the diaphragm as well. That is a really neat one. Most people don't understand that cuts your body in half from inferior and superior levels. So breathe through your nose because it cleans the air, warms the air, and moistens the air. Yeah, we did these, and then emphysema and asthma. Asthma, you can't get the air in. Emphysema, you can't get the air out. And that's typically people with COPD, or they were smokers or vapors. It ruins the elasticity in the lung, and the lung can't just, let go. So the diaphragm pulls down, creating a vacuum, making the lung kind of expand. And so when you relax, when you exhale, you're just relaxing. That's a passive movement. The lung should go back like elastic, but if you have emphysema, it doesn't. Here are some pulmonary diseases. No, you do not have to know these. Some of you had questions about COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And some of these fit in there. Again, you don't have to know. You just might recognize some of them from, maybe you've been sick, like bronchitis, asthma. You can see that's bronchitis is mucus in the lungs. And, asthma is when they constrict, air can't get in. Emphysema, no elasticity, air can't get out. Pneumonia can be viral or bacteria, and that's when fluid fills in. And then asbestos is a particulate, which causes scar tissue and a lack of good air exchange. And then tuberculosis is a whole nother deal. Bacteria that can cause infection in the lung. So here is the alveoli. There's a lot going on here, and there's a lot going on in the capillary bed, and we're going to cover them both in this video. So please, please, please pay attention, because when you stop and think about homeostasis, so this is the culminating chapter. All those other things we had to learn, cell reproduction, cell respiration, protein synthesis, these are all metabolic processes that if the cells can't get their nutrients and the cells can't give off their waste, nothing else is going to happen. So all of those processes are done because we can get air in our lungs, bring in fresh oxygen, let out the CO2, and then ultimately at the capillary bed of all the cells in the body, they can do the same thing, exchanging nutrients and gases. So at these capillary beds, there's a lot going on. That's why blood pressure is so important. If blood pressure gets too low or too high, a lot of damage can happen. A lot of nutrients won't get there, waste won't get out, damage can happen because these are very, very small capillaries. They're one squamous epithelial cell thick. That's why if you get up in altitude and the pressure is less in the atmosphere but the same in your blood, you can actually bleed through this into your lung and cough up blood or get a nosebleed. So just the pressure has to be very, very stable. It has to be in homeostasis levels, or a lot can go wrong. Same with scuba diving. If any of you scuba dive, you know how very, very important it is to decompress and not hold your breath as you come up, things like that, because there's a very narrow threshold for these pressures. So alveoli, that goes all the way back to chapter 1 with surface area. You can see the CO2 coming back from the cells that gave it off because of cellular respiration, and then picking up the fresh oxygen and then going back to the cells for more cell respiration. And this is just another image of it. In this image here, you can see a lot of what we covered. You have the red blood cells. You have oxygen coming into the tissues, into the cells for cellular respiration. You got amino acids coming in for protein synthesis. You have a little bit of water coming in. That's just from the pressure. You got glucose coming in for cellular respiration. And then you have CO2 going out, waste molecules, water to keep the osmotic pressure going in here. So you got blood pressure driving this end. And then as you lose pressure, this has to stay steady. So the only way it can stay steady is once this becomes hypertonic, if you remember that from osmosis, this will draw in water to keep this going. If this flow in a capillary stops, then all your cells stop and metabolism stops. And so obviously this is where critical things can happen. And again, that's why blood pressure is very important. And we just went over these metabolic reactants, oxygen, glucose, amino acids for cell respiration, protein synthesis, and even cell production, technically. The difference between artery and a vein, you could probably list some right now off the top of your head, and you should think through those as we go through them. You can clearly see the arteries are more muscular, and they can dilate and constrict. Veins pretty much stay the same. They don't dilate much, only the arteries do, and they have valves. And that's to help blood return to the heart. Kind of like you think of a roller coaster and you're going up the hill and it makes that clunk, 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 clunk. That's really similarly how the blood, think about how it gets from your feet back to your heart. That's a lot of blood. It's thick, it's heavy, it's viscous, and the heart's a very small muscle, so it does need assistance. Not only will it get assistance from these valves in the veins, it'll get assistance by the skeletal muscle pushing in on the vein as you move. That's why walking helps get rid of fluid in your ankles. So, what are some of the other differences? One of the main ones, arteries go away from the heart, veins always return. Arteries are what you take your blood pressure and your heart rate on. You don't get a pulse in your vein. You have a pulse in your artery. Veins keep flowing steady. So this is going to come in with high blood pressure, go into this little weird capillary bed looking thing, down. So the pressure is going to degrade to one red blood cell. And because these are so small, you increase the diffusion rate. Remember, the smaller something is, the more surface area to volume. It goes all the way through this course. So I'm going to list a few of them here. We mentioned most of these. I wouldn't worry about the oxygen levels because that's going to throw you off. Yes, and very much assisted by skeletal muscle. I'm going to show you another diagram of that. If this helps you, use it. If it doesn't, it's okay. But arteries are like a fire hose. They're under a lot of pressure. You would much rather have a vein cut than an artery cut, because an artery under normal blood pressure, 120/80, will shoot 30 feet. A vein will just ooze. It's just a streaming, it's not pulsing, it's not under pressure. Capillaries are like coffee stirrers or a soaker hose. If you don't know what I mean, it's a thing you just want water to ooze out of the hose onto a garden. You don't want it just spray. You can find them at stores, but because capillaries are permeable, so nutrients can get in to the cells and waste can get out. And then veins are kind of like a steady flowing garden hose. So here's what I'm talking about with walking. So the gastrocnemius here is pushing in. As it contracts as you walk, it pushes on the vein. So you might think, well, that'll shove the blood back down to the foot. But remember, veins have valves, one-way valves. So as that pushes down, the valve shuts, and that actually squirts the blood back up to the heart. So walking even 10 minutes can help with blood flow. And especially if you start get pooling in the ankles because you've been sitting too long or something like that. This is when a valve blows. So this is a varicose vein, kind of a grody picture of one, but when that one-way valve actually blows, then the blood can pool, and that can get kind of unsightly. But that's what a varicose vein is. It's a blown valve in a vein. Here's another image of a capillary bed. So the fresh oxygenated blood is coming in on an artery, and that pairs down to an arteriole, meta-arteriole into a capillary bed. And as these fluids gush out, so we're leaking glucose, amino acids, water, this gets more and more hypertonic in the capillary, gets more hypertonic, and then water will come back in because it's drawn in because of osmotic pressure to keep this moving along. If it wasn't for the osmotic pressure, this would stop, and then your cells wouldn't get nutrients, or more importantly, at that point, they would not get their waste product picked up. Remember, the pH, the waste products stay there, the pH changes. pH changes too much, you have enzymes denaturing. The other added feature here is the lymph. The lymph system intertwines with your capillary system, and as the capillary system leaks, the lymph will collect it, again by osmotic pressure, and the lymph is just like the veins. It has one-way valves, and they go back to the heart only. So arteries go away from the heart, lymph and veins go back to the heart, and they have valves to help do so. And here is the picture that's in the book. And this has all of what we talked about over the last 5 or 10 minutes. You got blood pressure coming from the left ventricle of the heart. And as it loses its pressure because molecules leave, water leaves, something's got to keep this capillary bed running smoothly. As this gets hypertonic, osmotic pressure will move back in, keep it running steady, and then return to the heart through a vein. You see the lymph in here. Each circle is one erythrocyte or a red blood cell, and then these are tissue cells here. So blood pressure drives it in, gets hypertonic, that draws in water, and osmotic pressure keeps it going. And this is the basis of the cells getting fed so they can do their metabolic processes, such as Chapter 4, cell respiration, Chapter 6, cell production, Chapter 7, protein synthesis. This is why we eat. This is why we have our blood pressure taken. This is why we have to excrete waste, because right here is where you're actually being fed. Think about respiration and cellular respiration. You're breathing, you're inhaling into your lungs because of your diaphragm so that your capillary beds can respirate. Yep, and we've been talking about blood pressure. Hypertension is high blood pressure, hypotension is low blood pressure, and we've mentioned how they each can cause a problem. And now we're at the blood flow. So there's some rules. Some students want to start out there like, I'm just going to memorize this. Please don't try to memorize it. You're going to wind up getting confused. So the rules are lung. Pulmonary means lung. Okay? Pulmonary means lung. The heart is 4 chambers. There's a left side, atria and ventricle, and a right side, atria and ventricle. So the left has 4 letters, and it's going to pump only to the body. It has to go to the whole body, this left ventricle here. So left has 4 letters, and body has 4 letters. The right is going to pump to the lungs. Right has 5 letters, lungs have 5 letters. Okay? Remember again, arteries always go what? Away from the heart. Veins always return to the heart. And again, lung means pulmonary. So if you're a little red blood cell and you're in the largest vein in the body, you're in the vena cava. Think of it, vein cave. Big vein, right? Caves are big. You're in the vena cava. You're going to go into the RA, the right atria, into the right ventricle. If you're going away from the heart, it's an artery. Going to the lung, pulmonary. Pulmonary artery, lung, diffusion of gases, CO2 out, O2 in, back to the heart through a vein, came from the lung, so it's the pulmonary vein, left atria, left ventricle, it looks like a V, pumps really hard out the aorta, gets a little bit smaller to an artery, into a capillary, diffusion, glucose out, amino acids out, oxygen out, CO2 back in, and waste products, and then back through a vein. So the only way to get this is to keep working through it and remember the rules. Pulmonary means lung, arteries always go away, veins always return, right side of the heart goes to the lungs, 5 and 5, left side of the heart goes to the body, 4 and 4. It's actually only 11 because I have to give you one. And I bracketed this because this is where, if you think what condition you're in, if you're coming back from the body cells, you're going to be high in CO2 and you're going to need oxygen. And where are you going to go? To the lung. Well, then you pick up oxygen, and then where do you want to go? Back to the heart to be pumped very powerfully to all the cells to diffuse out oxygen, glucose, and amino acids for cellular respiration and protein synthesis metabolic processes. Here's an AKG. I know you've seen this somewhere before. Most people, you don't see the graph. So the y-axis, the data, is millivolts. So this is obviously measuring electricity that we talked about in the nervous system. This is time on the bottom, but most people, it doesn't really show up because part of analyzing an EKG is also the distance between the atria contracting and the ventricles contracting. So what I ask you to know, and it kind of makes sense, this little P, this P wave is that is when the atria are contracting. And atria are very tiny. You want to know how big the atria are in your heart? Look at your thumb. Look at the knuckle to the tip of your thumb. That's how big the atria are inside. We used to dissect sheep hearts a lot, and that's all the bigger it is. The ventricle is much bigger. And this QRS wave, QRS, that's when the ventricles are contracting. So the left and right ventricles contract at the same time, but they go different places. So it's 2 pumps in one, left to the body, right to the lungs. And the other way to remember this is it looks like an upside down V, and the ventricles are bigger. So this is a lot more electricity needed to contract that muscle tissue in the ventricles, the bottom part of the heart. This is repolarization. Don't worry about the T. That's the ventricles repolarizing. There's a little blip in here where the atria repolarize. Again, you don't have to know that. So P, atria are contracting, left and right atria at the same time. QRS, the ventricles are contracting. So here I go again with my bad news. Research is coming out in the last 10 years especially with this, and I'd be amiss not to tell you, not to warn you. You know, I talk about diet a lot, and we talked about the glycocalyx in chapter 2, so I try to explain why, you know, what high amounts of sugar, and you know that sugar will spike insulin, and insulin blocks fat burning, but it also abrades the lining of your vascular system. So sure, you know, eating a treat every now and then, that's not a big deal, but now that they're putting sugar in most all the food, unless you're reading labels and eating whole foods, you're eating it. Even if you're not eating any dessert, you're eating sugar. Like we said, tomato soup's 55% sugar. Look at the label. Look at salad dressing labels. Look at barbecue sauce labels. Look at ketchup. Yogurts, unless it's plain Greek, plain Jane yogurt, it's probably about 50% sugar. Cereals full of sugar. So you could be accidentally eating it even though you're trying to eat right. So I'm not judging you. I'm not putting you down. Please, please, please start reading labels if you're eating processed food. And make sure that you know I have a couple websites. There's over 200 different names for sugar. So please be careful. So this is the mechanism of why they're finding that even people in their 20s are having heart attacks now. So you're eating the sugar and the insulin, it goes to the blood, it tears up this glycocalyx. If you're doing it constantly through the day, even power bars and these so-called health bars, it means that it never gets a chance to repair. So now you're damaging the inside of your vascular system. And any kind of refined carb, it can be pasta, even whole wheat pasta. None of that stuff is good stuff. It's so refined that there's really, just because it's brown doesn't mean it's good. So any kind of thing with pasta in it, breads, bagels, pastries, cereal, health bars, all that stuff is going to cause this to be abraded. And then that allows plaque then, if you did damage inside the vascular system, that's when plaque starts to form. So then this is one study here, you can read this, and I even linked the source, so if you open this PowerPoint, you can see that's linked to an article. I don't want to just put the stuff up there and you can't go to the original source on it. Now, I didn't use a peer-reviewed journal because I figured if you clicked on that and opened it, you wouldn't read it. So I actually put an article up there so you can read it, and then they have references if you actually want to do more reading on this. But you can see here, the real scary part is you might think, oh, compared to young 41 to 50-year-olds to very young 40 or younger, and you might think, oh, 1 in 5, that's not so bad. But here's the real scary part. The proportion of very young people having a heart attack has been increasing, rising by 2% each year over the last 10 years. This is crazy. And these are some of the reasons, and the source is up here if you want the Cleveland Clinic, cardiovascular clinic. And this goes right back to what we were saying with METs. So dietary choices, such as exposure and access to ultra-processed food. And the ultra-processed food trifecta is flour, which is refined carbs, starches that turn to sugar quickly. Some of them turn to sugar in your mouth. That's how fast the starch in these very refined ultra-processed foods, that's how fast they can turn to sugar. They don't even have to wait to the small intestine. And then, yeah, it's flour and sugar and fructose. And then you have some of the polyunsaturated fatty acids, but the ones that aren't so healthy. And then weight and obesity, but now we know about toe feed, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. You don't necessarily have to be carrying around subcutaneous fat in any great proportion to have this be a problem. Actually, there's quite a few people that carry more weight, 30, 40, 50 pounds, and they're not metabolically unhealthy because they're actually eating good food. They're just eating too much good food. So this is truly a metabolic issue. This isn't a body image issue. This isn't shaming. This is, oh my goodness, we're having 20-year-olds with heart attacks. And that's just unprecedented. They didn't even used to teach about this in med school because they never had any problem like that. But you can also see sedentary lifestyle and decreased physical activity. Because remember, if your muscle tissue can take up glucose without insulin. So if you just get more muscle tissue, you can actually help that. The other thing is the more mitochondria you have in your muscle cells, the more insulin receptors, and you can make yourself insulin sensitive just by walking every day. So, it's very easy to turn this around, and it's just sad that this damage, and it's really coming down to an ultra-processed food diet. And I'm the worst hypocrite. I mean, I used to eat junk, but I'd burn it. I was so active, I'd burn it, and I think that's why I came out unscathed. But I'd be amiss if I didn't bring this up and make you aware of it, that this is a serious problem. This is an exercise you can do. I hope you try it. This is showing you how to take your pulse. That's a radial artery. You can take it on your carotid artery. You have to put your fingers on your trachea. You can feel it when you're humming. You feel the vibration go all the way to the side. It's deep next to the trachea. That's your carotid artery. I usually take my pulse on my carotid artery because it's just more accurate. And these are other ones you can use. So, and you count for 10 seconds, and then you multiply that by 6, and that gives you beats per minute. But you should do it 3 times. You should do it when you're sitting for a few minutes, because if you just got up, that's going to make it higher. If you're talking to someone, that's going to make it higher. And if you're doing something like online or listening to something, actually just listening to something pleasant can make your heart rate go up. I'm not kidding. So that's how you take your pulse. And then this is a exercise you can do. Obviously, I did this in class to determine how fast your heart has to compensate to just stand up. It's called orthostatic hypotension, is actually a condition where people, if they get up too fast, they'll pass out. Hypotension means low blood pressure. But this is kind of the reason for it, because you think about all the blood in your body, majority of it's below your heart, and if your heart can't compensate properly as you move from a laying position to a standing position, then that's an issue. If you do have issue with getting lightheaded, then don't do this exercise. But you'll be surprised at the percent that your heart rate has to jump to just compensate for going from lying to standing.